Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube and you'd like to be part of the conversation, you have to travel first through the link that's in YouTube. Then that'll take you to Zoom. You register there. Then you go through the link in Zoom to Mokana, and that's where you can actually ask questions and be part of the conversation. If you want to be part of the panel, you just have to get here a little early, 6:40 Pacific Standard Time. We do mic checks and make sure that everyone looks good, sounds good, has good internet before we get started. So you just need to be here by then to be part of that. Once we start the mic checks, the panel is closed, and that's what we're going to use. Those are the people that are going to be part of it that day. You can get here as early as 6 a.m. We start talking. I can't promise anything in the first that first little bit of time. We're just kind of wandering around, making sure that we've got everything while we have tea and coffee and just getting ready to go. At 7 o'clock, we start general conversation that is anything you want to talk about related to media, virtual production, those types of things. At 8 o'clock, we have we usually have something specific that we're talking about. So today, we're going to be talking about audio processing. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about stream decks, and then so on and so forth. You can get a color on Friday as well, and hosting on Thursday. And then, of course, we've got folks from South by Southwest coming to talk about education on Saturday. So it's a really, really busy week, and those weeks are going to continue to get busier and busier. So second hours, make sure to watch. We're sending out the agenda every day with your Zoom registration. So when you get the announcement, you can look down below and see what we're actually going to be discussing each day. If you would like to be part of, if you'd like to share this and have other people be part of what we're doing here, you can share the link. Don't share your own link. People will come in as you. You want to share the link that I just put into Mokana. That's how you actually can join the actual conversation there. And then also we share at the top of the, or at 6:40, between 6:40 and 6:43, we share the Discord link. Discord is, we're almost 1,000 of us. Keep talking about this stuff between shows. Our only request there, and I haven't said it for a while, is that you have first name, space, last name, and that you have a picture of your own head, preferably from the front, with a gray or a white background. It just really, I'm just saying, the front of your head is better. Yeah, see that we could have Chris Fenwick doesn't look nearly the same. That's all I'm saying. So anyway, so we'd love to have you in there. If you're in Discord, it really makes it nicer when people do that. It just feels more personal. We're really here to build. We're doing more than just talking. We're building a community where we know each other, and so those names and those pictures and the interaction that we have makes a difference. So hopefully you'll take us up on that. Anyway, Bill, let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
First one comes from Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania, who says, can you remote control a Facebook portal like you can a Zoom room?
Go ahead, Guy.
So it's actually not a proper Zoom room. It's what they call a personal collaboration device. I have one of them right there. You can kind of see it. I'm using it as my attendee monitor. And what it does is it doesn't allow you to remote control like a traditional Zoom room will have far end control, which you can automatically enable. So this one, the end user would have to control their up, down, side to side in Zoom. And that's only on the larger one that has the bigger sensor. So the Facebook Portal Plus. And so, yeah, you can't control it like you can a regular Zoom room.
Go ahead, Chris.
I noticed, Guy, that I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day. I had to reconnect them and kind of reacquaint them so they knew that they belong to each other. And for some reason now, my portal, when I open it up and I start the Zoom app, it asks me for the pairing code. I'm like, that's weird. And it's almost like it wants to be more a part of my account, or I don't know what it's doing, but I can click past it. So it's not really part of my main system, but it started to behave differently. Very strange. I don't know what it is yet. I'll let you know if I figure it out.
All right, next question. And by the way, if you have general questions, we have a lot of questions already stacking up for the second hour. Curtis Judd has bumped in. He's here for business. And so so we have a lot of stuff stacking up. Make sure to tag it. So once you've asked the question, you can tag your question as second hour. It makes it easier for us to organize those. And remember, today we're talking about audio processing, and we've got a bunch of questions that are stacking up. All right, next question.
Sure. Doug Ferguson, actually, our friend from here in the panel, is in with how would I control a Zoom room with remote tech, or a remote tech as a human being, I guess.
Go ahead, Guy.
So you'll want to make one of the users an admin. So once they're an admin, they'll have access to the Zoom Room backend, and you could hit launch, and it'll launch the controller inside of a browser. So then I could actually do it real quick if you want to see it. So once you have it, you go to room management, Zoom Rooms, and then they'll have this little pop-up over here that says launch controller. And then it'll pop open like this, and then they can do all that stuff. Another Zoom Room controller is now connected. Okay, so it's connecting. So this is just on my iPad. I can see all you guys, all the participants. And then if I wanted to pin Doug, I could pin him to the second display, and now he should be in the meters or on the scopes. And then if I want to release him, I just unpin him. So anybody in the world could be doing this at that point. So, but the trick is to make them an admin.
And you can open multiple windows, right? In multiple browser windows, so you could control all the rooms from a.
Yeah, because each one's unique with the. If you look at the top URL, you can't see it; it's cut off. But there's a URL up at the top that's unique.
Yep, that's great.
It's just a screen issue. You need a lot of screen real estate if you have a bunch of them.
Yep, absolutely. But it's we're looking at trying to kind of we've had tablets running all of those, and we're looking forward to not doing that anymore. All right, next question.
James in Dublin, Ireland, I presume. I want to receive audio from 3 guests live over the web, bring them into a software mixer where I can add audio adjustments and delay to bring them into closer sync, and then stream the result into a Zoom session via Mimo Live. Any suggestions on software tools that I could use to get the audio and process it? Note, the audio is for effect only. It would only be a one-way conversation. There's no need to reply to the incoming audio, if that makes any sense.
I think you could do that all in Mimo. Like it does calls, it does WebRTC. So you could theoretically, it has Mimo call functions that you could use for that, where they'd each come in as their own separate pieces. And I believe that you can apply audio delay to them. So I'm not sure that you need any more than that. It's not, we do it with Zoom and hardware. We don't do it with software, but I think you could do it all in one place. Go ahead, Courtney.
If it's coming into Zoom, will that screw up the echo cancellation algorithms in Zoom because you're delaying each one individually separately than the feed they're feeding you with?
Well, you have to set up a mix minus for the folks that are there. It sounds like he said that audio is for effect only. They don't have to reply to incoming audio. So I don't think you have an echo problem because you're not sending audio back. It sounds like they're going only one way, to that. So that would fix that to some degree. Obviously, once you start delaying audio in any case, you want to try to put everybody on headphones to get rid of any kind of echo issue as you start to tweak that. If you're not doing it in a room, which most of us aren't right now. so that makes it a little easier. Any other comments there? All right, next question.
Moving on to Doug Ferguson's second question from Fort Wayne. Is there any way to cancel a pin in a Zoom room?
Go ahead, Guy. Can't hear you, Guy.
Hopefully you mean pin and not spotlight. So it's just unpin video if you're using the controller. So you can see it right there. I'm just going to unpin you, and that releases it. But you might be talking about spotlight, and that's different.
What I found last night, I had a panel of 5 people, and I had 2 people already pinned, but then I wanted to pin another person. So I started to pin one, but then another person started to talk. And so I'm like, no, I don't want that guy. I want this guy. But I didn't see a cancel on the screen. So I had to finish the process and push them to a screen, then go back, find the other person, then push them to a screen. I just, once you click on pin, I didn't see a cancel. So that's, you just
talking about when you have the 3-up or 2 or 3-up display of like, okay, now which person do you want to put the screen on?
Right. I had 3 monitors in my
If you
Zoom
just click
room.
outside of it, if you tap outside of it, does it not go away?
No, that didn't work.
And
bummer.
The one thing that I will say is that trying to share pinning. I mean, whether you're doing it our way where you pull everything out, but having a computer for all the major speakers or a series of computers that do this makes life, even if you're sharing the audio and each one is just pinning something, trying to pin and unpin during an event is really painful. Like I'm just, like it will slow down the event. It'll slow down the user's experience of the event as you putz with it, whereas, and especially if you don't have enough people, so I highly recommend at least having 3 or 4 computers that are, and it can be, again, what we're going to be testing. And probably next week I'll be testing Courtney's PC. Even if it's those little ones that are outputting those, the idea though is that you have individual ISOs of them. Now, I prefer to have individual audio ISO too, so they don't make any noise while the other person's talking, and I can control that. But even if you don't do that, I highly recommend being able to pin different people from different computers, so that they all go into your switcher as a camera. It's like night and day. This idea of pinning and unpinning during an event is just not going to make a smooth event. And that's my strong recommendation in that area after doing this for 10 years with Hangouts and then Zoom. Go ahead, Chris.
For those of us with more modest budgets, though, I can envision if a person was assigned to it, Doug, you could use that one Zoom room to feed, you have your 3 inputs into your switcher, and you can almost just use it as a preview bus. Like, screen 3 is good, screen 2 is good, where that one is just feeding, almost like a preview bus.
I also wonder whether there's a way to tie an ATEM or whatever you're tying in. It's easier to tie ATEMs in because they're more programmable, but tie in using GPIO if you're using a TriCaster or something like that, but tie that into Zoom OSC where it does the selections for you. So you cut to 4 and it auto, if you preview 4, like preview 4, it says pin. So then you have 2 computers. Like I would,
and then
definitely say
Siri to it where you could ask for people by name.
Yeah, exactly.
Preview Jason,
but
preview Edelson.
The one way that you possibly could do it with Zoom OSC, and we'd have to get Andy in here to talk to it. But I think you could end up with when you push someone to preview bus, if you had 2 computers and both of them were activated by that, pushing somebody into the preview bus would have that computer light up, like that computer pin them automatically. And then you'd be able to use just 2 computers if you're switching back and forth. It might be something to think about as far as that goes. You'd have to test it a lot. Anyway, next question.
And Alex, Mickey raised his hand, so I didn't know if you wanted to accept out of
yes,
that.
Yes, Mickey
is
day. It was an audio day, and yeah, we will bring Mickey in. All right, next question.
So moving on to Doug Ferguson's last question, looks like in there, he asks, is there a way to have a Zoom room in a webinar practice session?
And let me kind of explain that. So we were doing testing before the show last night, and things were working pretty well. And I appreciate the comments of the previous. I'm going to do some more testing for sure. But what I found last night, when I turned on the real webinar, I brought the panelists in like 45 minutes ahead of time. But what I found was that the Zoom room could not come into the webinar until I turned on the webinar. You know how you're sitting there in practice mode. And so, but I just couldn't practice ahead of the show until I hit start webinar. And then once I started, the Zoom room popped in, and then I promoted it to a panelist, and then I was able to do my pinning. But my struggle was I couldn't do that before the actual webinar was turned on. So that's more explanation of my question.
Go ahead, Guy.
You might want to try making it an alternate host and see if that can pop it in. That's what I would try doing, or make it host. Either way, that should force it.
Yeah, you should be able to give the same access that you would have for you should be able to give it the same access that other people would have for the practice session. I have to admit, I'm very old fashioned. I still don't use the practice sessions unless I have to. So so I don't know for sure, but I think that you can. The ones that I've been pulled into with practice sessions, it just seemed like everyone had a access code. But I think that Guy might be right that if you make it a co-host or an alternative host, you might have a better solution. And by the way, for everyone watching, we've got plenty of questions for the second hour. Not very many questions for the general questions for the first hour. If we don't have more general questions, then we'll have a longer second hour. So that's how that'll go. Anyway, next question.
Moving on, Guy Cochran here in the panel is interested in what's happening. I guess there's some news today from Teradek. Anybody know what that is and want to talk about it?
Guy, what's the news? What's the skinny?
This is the new Teradek VDU-X. It is a 1080p 60 little encoder the size of a deck of cards. No battery inside. RTMP, RTMP-S. Powers via USB-C, and then you could bond 3 types of, Wi-Fi, Ethernet, cellular, 3 connections up in the cloud via ShareLink. Works with iOS via the AirMix app.
It doesn't even look like it's on their website.
It's probably not. I mean, this was embargoed. I'm a dealer, so I get this stuff early, and this will probably be up here pretty soon.
Is it the Video Go?
No, it's VDU-X is the new one, $695. And then I guess it starts up in less than 15 seconds. So like my other device that I currently use, my live view takes over a minute, and this thing you can be streaming in 15 seconds. So it's meant to go like on a DSLR or for some of these switchers that don't have a way to encode like the ATEM Mini, you can just kick it out. So pretty cool looking device.
Yeah, because I'm kind of blown away that it's not even on their website. So this is the and did they do an event, or did they? It was just embargoed until today.
Yep, embargoed until today, so it should be announced
and it does
available.
HEVC like the Go?
No, it does not do HEVC.
Oh, that's probably why.
So that you still got to pop up. Yeah, you still got to pop up to the big bucks for the Cube, which will do that. That's like $1,400.
So they're working on that kind of lower cost solution. Go ahead, Stuart.
Guy, is that a SD card slot on the side, and is that for recording or just configuration?
It's a SD card for recording as well.
Yeah.
So it's adding a good number of the capabilities of the mid-level ATEM Mini to a inexpensive ATEM, the low end.
I would say it's a different kind of device. I mean, it's more for people going out and doing like a wedding or a simple stream. I mean, we've used these cubes in the past for a number of just contribution type things where you want to get a feed out from a remote person and kick it up. And this one, the previous one wouldn't do 1080p 60, it would just do 1080p 30 for sports and things like that. People were really clamoring to have that kind of resolution. And so this one, I think it goes up to, at max, it was at 12 megabits per second, but I think I saw another stat where it said up to 25. So that's pretty clean. I mean, that's really kicking it up there. So the older encoders would not go up that high. So this thing should produce some pretty clean results.
It's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully we'll get to, do you have one?
I don't have one. There's another friend of mine, Steady Ready Chris. He has one. He'll be doing a live, I think at 10 a.m. I'll put a link in the Discord.
Yeah.
He'll be talking about it. He has one.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Do they predict battery life on it? Again, in the parts were power shy, but this could be useful.
Yeah, no battery internally. That's what makes it so tiny.
So what does it draw?
USB-C. So you can just use any little anchor type battery, the type that you would use with a cell phone.
That's great. No more of those LEMO connectors. It's always like with the cubes, it was always like trying to figure out what happened to that LEMO connector, and they're not all the same. So it was kind of it's historical, but I'm glad that they're just using a more standardized power input. Makes it a lot simpler. That's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to playing with it. Yeah, it looks good. Next question.
Dave Chalmers in Glasgow, Scotland says, how does one achieve a 1080 webinar status on Zoom?
Officially? So the big thing is that you have to prove that you have a reason to do it, so that you're doing something high profile. You're dealing with, people that, there's a situation that you're going to use and you just put it through support, but you really have to sell them on the idea that, that what you're doing has a high profile nature to it to make it work. And it's, with great power comes great responsibility. As we go to 1080p, it's less forgiving for the panelists. It's less forgiving for people watching. So it's not necessarily that you need it for everything either. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, yes, of course, you need a good reason other than 720 isn't enough. You also need to justify and prove in some cases to them that you actually have the sustained upstream to make use of it.
Yeah. And that you have to have a paid account, like a business account,
and a paid account,
roomed account. Yeah, it's not. It can't just be like, I got a pro account for $15 and I want to use 1080p. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'd double down on what Alex said, particularly about, I remember when my wife was doing some local television and they moved to HD cameras, all the talent went eek because they saw themselves in HD, and it was not necessarily a nice thing for them. And they had to redo how they did makeup and stuff like that at the TV station because of that high resolution. Now, if you're doing content people have to read, then that extra resolution becomes incredibly important. If you're doing diagrams or red small text, it's magnificent. But know what you're doing.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to something from a guy named Alex from Novato, California.
That guy. He's always got crazy questions.
Yeah. Does anyone have a motorized turntable for products that they really like? And don't say a dual turntable. It's not the same kind of.
I'm not looking for a Techniques 1200. 1200. I'm looking for a product turntable, and I'm just curious if anyone has ones that they like. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I haven't really seen like a pre-made one. It's always what I've seen on set, at least, has been created by the effects department or the art department.
That's my problem, is I just don't have any experience with buying them. But I'm looking for one that's motorized. There's a couple of that Kaiden used to make them back in the day, but there's a couple there that might work. Go ahead, Jason.
In the past, when I've needed to do this, I've simply used a servo. Just a simple brushless motor with really, really low voltage, but it's not going to be, it's not a finished product, of course.
Yeah, and I may build one. I may, like I'm thinking about building one, and I know they make great ones for cars, and big heavy things. But I'm just looking for something about 18 inches that I can buy quickly.
What about
and use it.
what about a Ronin?
A Ronin for a turntable,
like a gimbal, just spin it around.
I'm just looking for something that I can buy, and when I open it up, I'm like 10 minutes away from using it. That's the issue, Guy.
We use a cake decorator, Lazy Susan, but it's got a motor that can go forward and backwards, and it's adjustable speed, and then you can just throw a platform on the top of it to make it bigger.
That's a great idea.
A cake decoration, and it doesn't have like a little. Do they use like a foot pedal or something?
No, it has a little control, a little dial on it that you just adjust the speed. So it's on, off, and then adjustable speed, forward and reverse.
It makes sense. If you wanted to make like a zigzag around a cake, you would let it go, and then just sit there and go like a ceramics thing. Go, Bill, and then Courtney.
I just looked really quickly on product turntable, and I'm fascinated because they go from almost $6,000 down to about $500. So there's obviously
there's a business there. I know that they're there. I'm just trying to see if anyone had any recommendations before I went and bought one. So anyway, I'm starting to build the kit for the Amazon lives that I'm working on.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the same thing Bill did. There are a whole bunch of them if you look on eBay for product turntables for people who put stuff on that are slow rotating turntables. I don't know how much control you need over it, and until you said how big you needed, I thought you might need one for a car or something. But
no, I know where to get those ones. Go ahead, Mickey.
I'm just waiting for Alex to ask Andy like how to control it remotely via Zoom OSC.
Well, that'll eventually be an issue. I've been playing with turntables for a decade, for different reasons, and slowly piecing together a more complicated solution. But because what you really want is to be able to cue it. I want this rotation at this time. So if you want to show something during a presentation, you hit a button and it goes and it stops.
And to stop
and
at
that gets
exactly
more
this
into,
angle. That'd be cool.
It's more closer to using what Jason's talking about. Anyway, next question.
Moving on to Jason Fitzgerald of New York City. And Jason asks, I see people getting 1080 webinar ability in Zoom. Is it possible to get 1080 in Zoom meetings as well?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
The only place that we've, once you get the 1080, I think you get it in both webinar and Zoom. No, you don't? The meetings is separate?
Webinar meetings is easier to get. Webinars like the holy grail.
Webinars-
Very few
yeah,
people. I know a
webinars like-
lot of people who have
Yep.
it, and webinars super, super hard. In fact, I only know, well, now I know 5 with Doug. It's super hard to get.
Yeah, there you go. So it is possible. And ask support. Next question.
And be nice.
Be nice.
Dave Chalmers from Glasgow again. Are folks using Zoom Room software rather than desktop client to get Zoom distribution feeds into a traditional switcher?
That's exactly how I do it. So I use a Zoom Room for each person. That Zoom Room has 2 outputs. It has the person and it has the potentially their screen share. So when they screen share, I get both of those feeds into my switcher. So each person comes in that way for me. And that way, when they do a presentation, I have total control over what's going on. I don't have to have them screen, they hit screen share, but I get full resolution of both them and the screen share, which is super useful. Like it's, again, the thing to know is that, it costs more money to set it up and everything else. But when you start doing shows that take full advantage of what the product can do and add some hardware to it and everything else, Hosmuk showed a small preview of that with his, where people don't want to go back to physical events when the virtual events work. Like when they're not all jacked up and people have bad cameras and bad audio and they have to stop every 10 seconds to share the screen and they have to, like all that stuff is why people go, oh, I can't wait until we all are all back in a room. But once you start making them go, like really go, people just like, why would I get back on a plane? Like it's, like there's some people that want to, but we're seeing the same numbers that Hosmuk's seeing, which is 75% would prefer to be virtual, because it's a huge, going somewhere is a huge disruption, in their lives, and expense and sometimes impossible if it's visas or long flights or other things like that. It becomes, as Americans, it's easy for us to go, well, we'll just go anywhere we want, and just pay for the flight, but it's not that way for everybody. So anyway, that's how I use it. I don't know if anyone uses it a different way than that, but that's absolutely using Zoom Rooms to just pipe in and they just become cameras. Next question.
Eddie Scott in Mission Viejo, California is looking at syntax for HTTP with Discord. And he says, when I click the link in Mukana, I get a browser address that starts with Discord 3/invite, all as one term. And then Safari complains that it doesn't know Discord protocol. If I type in https:// in front and replace the 3 backslashes with .com/, then I get in. So something's not parsing right for him.
I don't know what that is. I think most people have just been clicking into the Discord. Is this a join, I guess, is the issue? Click the link.
He's trying to get from the link in Mukana into the Discord.
Well, and maybe that you're trying to get into the Discord invite. The Discord invite, well, I guess if we posted Discord with an invite with a / or whatever, that would not make any sense at all. Like, I don't know how that looks because it should just be a really short URL. Did we post something different this morning? I don't know. We'll try it tomorrow and click on it.
And we haven't heard any quarrels about people. Nobody's been really coming back saying I'm having trouble following the link.
Yeah.
So it might have just been a one-off.
Yep. Sorry about that. Next question.
Weird bit got flipped. Michael Patrick of Chicago is in next with, I keep hearing from my clients that they're only streaming until they can return to in-person events. Is anyone else hearing this? What will happen to all this extra video production capacity post-pandemic?
In 10 years, we'll be doing 20% of the physical events that we were doing before COVID. That's my prediction. 20%, maybe less. The reason for that is that it won't end. People will try to come back to physical events, but the damage is already done because the future was always going to be virtual events. Like, we're just moving faster into something that was always going to happen, and so there's a trajectory that once you start building global conversations, which is what we're doing here, And we can't do what we're doing here in the physical world, you know, every day talking to each other with people on 4 or 5 continents, you know, and it's just not, you know, physical events are not scalable. They're not efficient. There's no, the ROI is 1/10 of virtual events when the virtual events are done well. There's no future in physical events in the kind of level that we used to do them at. And it doesn't matter whether some people want to do it. The issue is that there'll be a breaking point where you just can't get enough people to show up to justify the physical event. It's not that nobody wants to go. It's not enough people want to go, you know, and, you know, we saw this with, I mean, I've talked about it before. I was in front of print, like a whole bunch of publishers, hundreds of publishers in 2001 that said, you need to leverage your current viewership, your current people reading your book, your magazines right now, and get them into digital. And they're like, oh, you know, we've been around for blah, 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 blah. That didn't turn out
Ask
too well.
Britannica how that went.
So the thing is that was, but you could see, anybody who really looked at this could see the trajectory for print that back then. And now it's almost gone. Like, I don't think about buying magazines anymore, you know, and you got to get, I was a fiend, like a magazine fiend. Like, I would go through 4 or 5 magazines, you know, a week. And I knew where every great magazine shop was in every city that I go to often. Like, so it's not like I didn't care about magazines before, but they just didn't make the turn. And the thing is that we're going down that hill with virtual events. All of us who work on these events can see it. When you see these moments where you have these huge events with hundreds of thousands of people or thousands of people or even hundreds of people that could never do it physically, you're like, oh, you could just see the end, you know, but it will take time. It's just that everything got jumped by 10 years, you know, and, you know, it was always going to happen. And so there are definitely event companies that are desperate to go back to physical. There are people who want to go back to seeing people and everything else, but the ROI won't be there for very much longer. And as Zoom and others invest heavily in the event platforms, you know, that's the thing, is that there's so much money going into it right now that as those things smooth out and as people like us get better at doing it, it's just, you know, the damage is, you know, it's not like it's going to go away. People will try to go back to physical events. We don't know when. I mean, you know, who knows when this is going to end, but the longer it stretches out, the less there'll be left on the other end. Bill, and then John, and then Courtney.
Yeah, I'm going to support the whole idea, because I'm just remembering back, there was the migration of eyeballs from movie theaters to television. Not that movie theaters went away. They had their place, and the old technologies well, but more eyeballs watch TV. And then you had that to the idea of a personal device that just swept through here. And I even look at my own phone when it gives me the signals of how many hours I've spent in a particular period of time. And at first it was annoying, like, wow, I'm spending a lot of time on this device. And it's because the device was meeting my needs in a way that the old technology wasn't. And that's why I agree with Alex. I think it's going to be exactly the same thing. This is meeting a new set of needs for community and connection, but it's in its infancy.
It's also
just going to get stronger.
It's also right place at right time. If it had happened 10 years ago, it would have been too soon. But things like the A10 Mini, things like inexpensive cameras, things like Zoom, things like this, the fact that they all exist in one place is what makes this so, you know, so disruptive, is that the right ingredients were here at the right time. And, you know, when you think about, oh, I want to go to expos and see the products, well, you know, even in its most base state, what I'm cobbling together as my little training thing, I'd much rather go to someone who's an expert who can show me the product and talk about that product and go through it. And again, for a company, being able to do that for 1,000 people instead of 10 at a time, as someone like right now, my voice is a little bad. This is how my voice sounds at the end of every NAB, every IBC, is I can barely talk. Everyone knows what that sounds like, you know? And so the thing is that, what if you didn't have to do it? I used to be a demo artist. So I used to sit at NAB and show people how to use electric image, you know, for all day, you know, 10 to 6 sitting there. And I would answer the same questions every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, I would, one-on-one to answer the same thing. You know, how do I do this? And how do I do this? And what does this look like? And there was maybe one original question a day. So what you want is you want to do that in front of 1,000 people, not in front of one over and over and over again. You want to do it in front of have 1,000 people ask those questions. and then be able to have breakouts and go out into talk, have different specialists. If someone has a really special question, okay, let's send you off to there. And those are the kind of things that, as a demo, I mean, the companies will get so much more because there's so many people that don't go to NAB just because they can't afford it. They can't get a visa. They don't have the time. They don't have all those other things, and they would come to those kinds of things. And when that starts to take off, I mean, it's gonna burn like wildfire. It's just that all these companies right now are largely underinvesting in their online presence, and that's why we're not seeing it. So if I'll tell you, I can make a prediction right now. If the COVID thing stretches, like if the vaccine comes unwound, that there's new variants or whatever, it'll break the back of all these people trying to wait to go back, because once they can't go back this year, everyone will just change the DNA of what they're doing, and so that we don't know yet what's going to happen. But if that happens, it'll be really over. John and then Courtney.
COVID may go away, but we're working with the Monterey Convention Center, and the carbon footprint won't go away. Even pre-COVID, event planners were trying to figure out how to reduce their carbon footprint, and the virtual does that.
Last year, we were working with a couple of nonprofit organizations that are particularly interested in the environment, and they're talking right now about forcing every company that's putting on a convention to publish the carbon footprint for their convention, publish it, and if they don't, they will. Like they'll just say Dreamforce is this many tons of carbon. That's going to make it really unpalatable to go back to physical events, for a lot of these companies. And the only reason they can do it is because everything stopped. So they're just like, okay, you figured it out, or we're figuring it out. Like, just keep figuring it out. They're going to make it really hard to turn the system back on, for carbon footprint. And now that you have an administration that's a lot more focused on it, you can expect that to pick up speed.
And to follow up with what Jason said, I was working for Britannica Films doing an interactive video disc in Chicago. They have a shared cafeteria with the Encyclopedia. I was sitting at a lunch table with the head of sales for Encyclopedia Britannica with our video disc team, and we're saying, are you going to go do CD-ROMs? You're going to do? And I just remember it so clearly. He said, parents are always going to want to buy a full set of encyclopedias for their kids. We're never going away.
Yeah.
And we all looked at him and said, maybe never going to go away.
Never is a big word. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Stephen. No,
you hear of Wikipedia? No, I think there are certain types of conventions that will come back, which is auto shows, where the public wants to get in and see how the cars feel and see them up close. And it's almost impossible to experience that in a virtual setup. But the question is, what's going to happen to all the convention center infrastructure? Is there some way that they can be repurposed?
Oh yeah,
like dance clubs or something. People are going to get back together again. These are socially, but
they're potentially
all become Amazon warehouses.
No, they are perfectly positioned to be massive broadcast facilities. That every room, every piece, everything is a place where you can go if you don't want to put the infrastructure in to your own. Because the thing is not everybody can afford to put $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 into a studio where they can make it look great. And if you think about it, these because of the infrastructure that these organizations have, they can connect them all. So the thing is that they can connect these broadcasts where you can have seamlessly go back and forth between New York and Chicago and LA and everything else. And all of that stuff is all built into what they're doing already. And so, providing lots of studios. If we move to something more virtual, you're going to have a lot of companies and a lot of little companies that are, that just need it for the day. They don't need it to do it every day. They should do it every day, but they just need it for that day to do their virtual event, and they need places to go to do that. Now, and the thing is that the reason that convention centers are so good at it is they have really high ceilings. So you go into an office building, you get these 9-foot ceilings, and it's just a disaster. And so the thing is getting 12, 15, 20-foot ceilings makes a huge difference in the ability to build great little studios. That the key is to make them modular, and I've got a lot of designs for that and patents. Anyway, Stephen and then Stuart.
Yeah, companies that have auditors and stuff. We just came through an audit for the annual report, and we got more initiatives done this last year and saved over $800 million.
Yeah.
So that's where it's going.
the movement is not going to pencil. It's just not going to pencil out. You know, like it's not. You know, that's
just
the issue.
can't.
Yeah, Stuart.
I just have to take an exception to something Courtney said there. Getting into car shows and feeling the cars is a great way to lose your fingers. But on that same sort of area, it's like running those sorts of events right now is really, really hard because of the limits that have been placed on like the number of people who can attend those sorts of events. Even if we can go back to running them, it's going to be very hard for any of those sorts of large events to actually make profits from sales of seats, whatever, because the limits of numbers means by the time you get all the teams in, whether it's car racing or bike racing or push bike racing or BMXs or anything like that, the moment you get enough people in as a support crews, you can no longer bring in the paying punter to fill the stands. So it's going to be a challenge to run any of those events, and anybody providing streaming for those is going to be looking at selling those streams rather than selling the tickets to get the bums on the seats.
Mickey?
Yeah, just going back to Michael's question of what will happen to all the extra video production capacity. I think, like, I mean, I'm sure Alex would hate this, but I'm pretty darn sure that every production, every event that wants to go back to physical events will try to do it in a hybrid sense, and it's going to be horrible. But the production the production capacity will be utilized there
for a while. Yeah, no, there'll be this kind of in between that people try to do hybrid, and it just will fail. You know, and
there's always a face plant before the collective learning experience.
Everybody has to learn from experience that they're, you know, and when they see the ROI so much, because here's the thing is that, again, if all of these people right now that we see here were on stage, and this is a small panel for us, but if 12 people or 15 people are on stage all having this discussion, it would be a disaster. Like in person, this conversation would be a disaster. Instead, we can hear each other clearly. We can see everybody's face. We can have this discussion. We can switch back and forth. It's a much better experience virtually than it would ever be physically. And this kind of conversation doesn't happen without this many people. It's just a different kind of thing. Next question.
Dave Chalmers is back from Glasgow, Scotland, saying, are folks using any tools to measure lip sync on incoming contributions, or are you just doing the clap test?
So the Hitomi makes a Matchbox is the kind of the industry standard. They used to be, it's the same engineering team, and we can get those guys on. I'll get the guys to come on and show it. But it's the same engineering team that used to build Validate. That got bought by, or was made by Bell, and then it was bought by Snell, and then bought by someone else, and it never really, never got upgraded past 1080i. So Hitomi does the Matchbox does the other big, and we'll see if we can get those. I've talked to them before, and what they have is a piece of hardware that can sit on one end and have you pick up an iPad on the other and just show it to it, and it'll sync. It'll tell you exactly what your sync is. So we'll have some fun with that, and it's really good. You can also use visual ones, guys showing a visual one. Those ones are really tricky because the tricky part of using these is that your playback has to be, in the same chain as your camera. Otherwise it's not accurate, And so the issue you get into is that you have to have the camera playback in it, or it doesn't test. And then a lot of the ones you come download from YouTube are not as good. The other thing you can do is, if you're streaming or if you're recording, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll have a slate that you would have for film, and we literally just we go record. A lot of times it's like HLS or whatever. We go up and go whack and just close it. And we open that in Final Cut and see what the difference is. We just dial it in. That's a lot of times we don't have a lot of stage time to do it. We have more time here to do that, but it's another way to do it. The clap test like this, I find, so I think I've said this before. We do it every time when we do an event, on a stage. We do it because the crew expects it. So we literally do it so that they feel better. Then we immediately jump into what's called a P test, which is just a, Peter Piper picked, because you can only say P's in a certain way, and they, you can tell very quickly whether they're synced. So we have someone read off a lot of P words, and then we have them go into just talking a little bit, and usually we can find it, if we don't have the tools to do it. So, I mean, our preference is usually the Hitomi, then it's some kind of visual check with the problem with the one that's moving that Guy was showing is it's really hard to know. Like when you're talking about dialing it into less than 30 milliseconds, it's really hard to see it and actually know that that's right on. It's easier to watch someone talk and tie that in than use that or measure it later and then put it in. And when you think about it, I can measure it in Final Cut faster than someone hitting a clap test by just having one slate, grab the segment, open it up, look at the difference, measure the difference, dial it in. I can do all of that faster than most people can do a clap test. Courtney?
But doesn't variable bitrate compression kind of throw a monkey wrench into all of these choices, depending upon the complexity and how much is moving in the frame is going to change your frame rate?
So it's not variable bitrate as much as it is variable frame rate. And and you're absolutely, your audio is always stable and your frame rate is constantly changing. And that's because, it just doesn't have enough process to do it. And so that's why, like on YouTube, we know that it'll go plus or minus 45 milliseconds. Now we know that because we watched it. We watched YouTube through not a Matchbox, but the previous one, the Validate. So we're watching YouTube through the Validate, and we just watch the little timer go back and forth, as it tries to catch up and then fall back and do all the stuff. So it's not horrible, but we also measured that YouTube's VOD is one frame ahead of the live. So, and it still is, we just measured it recently. So if you sync to live, your video will be ahead by one frame in YouTube in the record. And we don't know why, but it's some kind of infrastructural thing that's still there. What we do is we just sync for live because you can get away with one frame ahead. We're okay. The brain is okay with the video being ahead because the video is ahead at anything at distance in the real world. So because light is faster than audio, our brain is very, very used to adjusting to being the video being a little in front of the audio. It does it naturally. If you think about lightning, the ultimate test of that is lightning gets to you 7 seconds before the audio does it per mile, and so in a farm, you always know how far away the lightning is if you're out in a field, because you got to know how much time you need to get in. So so in that case, even someone 30 feet away or 40 feet away will be the video will be a little bit ahead of the audio in the natural world. Mickey?
What I was going to mention was covered.
Okay, let's jump to the next question. We're running out of time.
Yeah, moving on to Jason Beach's question from Albuquerque. I'll be installing an array of Ubiquity cameras in a law firm and pitched the idea of a live 24/7 streamed Skyline camera with a brand overlay. I'm thinking a dedicated hardware HDMI out to an ATEM Mini streaming directly to YouTube. Does anybody have a better idea or tips or tricks that could help me get this right?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Just a quick look at the Ubiquity cameras, and I don't see any with HDMI out. Aren't they all IP-based cameras? If so, can you load in the logo on the Ubiquity camera itself on its internal web server?
I could hack it in, but again, like I
No,
don't feel like that's going to be
a hack. It
future-proof.
should be something you should be able to load directly in their web page.
You can overlay the Ubiquity logo, which means you can modify it somewhere, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. To answer your HDMI question, there is a dedicated piece of hardware that Ubiquity makes, which will allow you to dial in a specific camera, a specific series of views, and it will simply output it to HDMI.
Mickey?
It sounds like a good way, but it's a lot of gear for just being able to load something into the camera itself. It's a lot of more points of failure.
Mickey?
Yeah, the Ubiquity's own cameras are proprietary. They don't use a standard like RTSP or whatever. So you have to go through the web interface to be able to pull the video stream of that, which, as Stuart mentioned, like dedicating a whole computer just for that, you could get a better camera from, say, their cheap ones from I'm blanking on the Chinese manufacturer that is very popular that Stuart uses a lot.
Hike
Is there-
Vision,
Yeah,
Hilux,
Is there an
and
iPhone?
Dahua.
Is there an iPhone app that will do that? Will just stream with a logo? Seems like that would be something that I can't believe there's not some.
I could write that. Keep in mind, I didn't say anything about a computer. You could just do it with an A10 Mini going straight up.
Well, you still need a video source. I'm just saying you could have a video source that's pretty, like an Android phone or an iPhone or whatever, just kind of pointed out that window. I will say, as the son of a lawyer, the idea of a 24/7 camera in a law firm is not something I'd.
No, not something on the roof of a law firm, it's the skyline.
Yeah.
The lawyer liked it. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Next question.
Okay. Moving on to Sound Mixer SF. Jesse, who's often here in the panel, not today, I'm afraid. He says, streaming from Vimeo to Facebook, the captions are coming in via EEG. Captions are very fine in Vimeo and scrambled in Facebook. Any idea around this or why it could be happening?
So I guess the question for Jesse is whether those are, if when he says they're coming in from EEG, is whether they're coming in over the web or they're coming into an actual EEG 492 as a 608, 708 caption. So that's the question that we have for it. And Jesse would have to kind of annotate that or ask another question that would be part of that. But if you actually have the hardware and you're embedding it in, you should get relatively good captions. When you're doing it through the web, their web interface, all of those have issues, so whether you're using Stream Text or whether you're using Falcon or whether you're using a lot of other ones, you'll end up with, they're coding errors in the web text that's coming through that is, it's just being misinterpreted. And YouTube's gotten through most of those things. Facebook is still not very good at it. And so it kind of blows up when it gets a bunch of things that aren't not what it expects. The reason that the 492 is, which is expensive but very effective, is so good at it is it's very low level. So it's just literally like RS422, like just, it's just little voltages. And as long as your cable is good, you will get it sends a very low level without a lot of syntax, but the syntax becomes more complicated as it gets packaged over the web. And so we have that problem all the time, with syntax errors. Zoom, actually, if you look at Zooms, if you take a 492 and you push it straight into Zoom, or you have someone who can do that directly into Zoom, you get really good captions. If you go through their third-party service where you get the token and you put it in, it's a mess, and so it goes from being really good to really bad. It's carriage return problems, other issues. So, if you're really doing a lot of it, I know that there's lots of cool things on the web, but the hardware works really well. It's used by broadcast all the time. And we haven't found a better solution on the web, but man, have we tried. Next question.
Moving on, Roberto Barrow of Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania says, Alex, could you use QLab to start up office hours broadcast?
I'm planning to. So what I'm working on is having QLab be part of the kind of graphics and other engine and so on and so forth as we move forward. So there's graphics in the beginning and kind of countdown clocks and things like that. So I definitely have a plan to do some of those things. I just haven't. We're going to start implementing those over next month. But yeah, you could absolutely do that, and I'm sure that you could create a set of commands that would let QLab time when it starts YouTube. When we move out of Zoom streaming directly to YouTube, which will happen next month, finally, when we move out of that, then I have lots of options. So for graphics and things and opens and closes and everything else, and no more Zoom logo and that kind of thing. Next question.
Gabriel Ung of Malaysia said, at what stage would you consider yourself a professional in your industry? What's the most important criteria for the panelists?
Go ahead, Bill.
So for me, my old, when I was young thing is, are you making your entire living in something? But I do think there needs to be a time frame, and that may be different depending on the thing you want to be a professional in. I don't think somebody really gets their feet deeply enough in to be called a real professional unless they've spent somewhere between 5 and maybe 10 years making their living out of something. If you've done that for a period of time sustained, then I started to feel like a professional in video after I'd put in that much time.
Yeah, we got to move really fast. Go ahead, Stuart.
a lot of people around here used to say you were a professional when you were getting paid to do it, but really being professional about it is the attitude you take towards doing the job properly and making sure you provide your clients with the best possible service they can get, regardless of the price that you're charging them.
Mickey?
Yeah, I haven't really thought this through for a while, but at some point, like earlier in my career, I thought that I will consider myself a professional once I don't get as stressed and flustered about every single project.
But that never
and
happens.
and I noticed that, like, watching Greg work on stuff, like for him, like, I'll just get this done. This is just another show.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't reached that point yet.
Courtney, real quick.
When people seek you out to pay you rather than you seeking them out for the job.
There you go. There you go. Next question.
Moving on to Lou Perez in Phoenix. I'm on a Windows machine and struggling with muting audio from Zoom when I get a call on my soft phone. Cell phone, maybe? Any
phone.
thoughts on the way to solve this easily?
Yeah, don't use a soft phone. Like, having anytime your phone is connected to the same thing that's on Zoom, you just end up with trouble. Like it's just trouble. Like, and there's anyway, Stuart and then Mickey, real quick.
Okay, just quickly. So a soft phone is like a VoIP, voice over internet phone call.
Yep.
The easy way to solve it is disable the soft phone app while you're in Zoom. Do one thing at a time.
Yep, absolutely, Mickey.
Mine is the other way around. Really quick on a Zoom on a computer, you can leave computer audio, and I've done that in meetings wherein I have to quickly check a sound file while the meeting is going on.
All right. Yeah. Next question.
Greg Curta here in the panel from Stanker, Norway says links in my Zoom chat are not clickable, although the pointing finger appears, also aren't copy and paste. Any ideas?
And that's in this Zoom or other people's Zooms? In this Zoom.
Yeah, in all my Zooms, which leads me to believe that it's something on my end. Yet I can't. I don't see anything obstructing it.
I don't.
Yeah, it's changed. I just checked it now, and yeah, I'm able to click on.
I'm not able to click on it and have it go to something. Oh yeah, it's not opening a new window, but I am able to copy and paste it if I select.
Okay,
it.
so it's half the same problem.
Mine opens it. It must be it's your birthday, and we just don't want you to go to the web.
Happy birthday, Greg.
Happy.
Well, thank you very much.
Right.
No, this has been going on for a while. Anyway,
Is it Greg's birthday?
It is Greg's birthday.
Okay, I don't know. We don't have any. I'm not queued up for anything because I didn't see it coming.
Here we go.
So
again.
here we go. We have to do it. Okay.
Let's keep the tempo up, guys.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll start. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Sorry,
It's a
Greg,
rite of
but-
passage.
and
It's a rite
many
of
more.
passage.
And many
no.
more.
What happened was you guys started together,
Right.
and then we went into this kind of canon thing.
Yeah.
Where it's just, and you ended exactly together.
That's funny.
So
I
we
think
just have to work
Alex
on the
needs to
mid-range.
pin himself or spotlight himself when he starts that, because as Zoom starts switching, then you switch to another person and you try and sing
Right.
along with them.
Did
With
Stephen
one
bring a
person as a
gift?
leader would work better.
That's great. All right. Next question.
Moving on to Robert Grader of Rockaway. Has anybody arranged daily COVID testing for in-person productions? Any best practices?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, a lot of production here, not daily, but a few days before start of principal photography and a few days after, and throughout the productions. Typically, people are bubbled in, living in the same place, and only interacting with the same people.
Yeah. And yeah, rapid testing or we've had some productions that are rapid testing every day, and they start 3 days before. So some people might get tested a lot in a given day, but most of them have been just temperature, and best practices. We do have COVID officers on everything that we're doing, and we have a cleaning person that is literally following everyone around, cleaning everything that they touch. Next question.
JJ McKenna.
Oh, go ahead, Chris. We're going to move on. We're going to keep moving. Yep.
JJ McKenna, Santa Venicio, Lower Scabo, and Marin. Is there a method to create an alternate host that is different in a different organization?
Go ahead, Guy.
They have to be on the same account. It's something that's in the Zoom tech. It says another license user on the same account can be the alternative host, but that's it. They can't be outside that.
Yep. Next question.
Manolo Lorenzo, no indication of where. How are you able to choose who from the panel is cutting the show? Does everyone have access to a virtual mixer, and could you discuss how you set it up?
Probably don't have time to get into it too much right now, but the person cutting it today is Stuart. And what we do is we hand off the host to Stuart, and then Stuart, whatever Stuart is viewing is what you're seeing, depending on the screens. And so if he goes to speaker view, it just bounces from speaker view. He has grid view, he can spotlight. So those are the things that the editor, the TD for this can execute for that. Next question.
David Brady in New York says, my house of worship would like to set up a dial-in service to listen to inspirational messages and so forth, sort of like call-in oats. Any recommendation as to where to look or what to look for? He's stumped.
So he wants like call-in records. So yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I'm just going to say, if you're not familiar with call-in oats, it's a Hall & Oates hotline, and you can dial it, and the lowest audio quality you've ever heard, it'll, press 1 for adult education, press 2 for whatever. Right. And it's hysterical. And I read a story about the guy who set it up, and it costs him like $2 a month to keep it going. And he goes, oh, I'll just leave it up forever.
I don't know, Stephen, real quick, and then we'll move on. I don't have a solid solution for this.
Find a kid that understands PHP. Go to
I'm sure that there's a service to do it, though. I know we've done it. We'll have to come back to that. I know I've done it in things where it's just a web service that has a number, and you call it and it records it and puts it on. And I just can't think of it out of my head. But there are web services. I'm not looking for. I think they're not looking for a coding solution. They're looking for a off the shelf solution. And
the off the shelf, everybody wants to change it. So find the kid first, then go to Twilio, and it works. I mean, it'll take about 20 minutes and you're on the air.
Okay, very cool. Next question.
Mark Hadley, random question from yesterday. How do you spell bokeh, and what does the look of the bokeh mean?
Go ahead, Stuart, and then Bill, real quick.
Bokeh, bokeh. It's actually a Japanese word, and it is the interaction between the light, the subject, and the lens. So it's about the art.
Well, when we call bokeh, we're talking about the background, how blurry it is. I mean, that's usually the practical way. There is a bigger Japanese name for it, but when we talk about it, we usually talk about how the background is blurring. It is the practical way that we use it. Go ahead, Bill, real quick, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, and the one place you will see it most distinctly is when you have a scene with a narrow depth of field and there are little tiny lights in the background or other kinds of light sources. It is the shape that they blur into. Things with bladed shutters, they might get a parallelogram kind of shape. That picture that was just put up has a pleasing bokeh. They are round and soft, and those are actually little lights, much smaller than those circles.
Next question.
Vincent Alvarez of Bellingham asks, I convinced a coworker to get a Logitech Brio webcam, but their image is bland and dull. How can I help them remotely?
Yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, almost all the time lighting will help a lot more than a better camera or better glass. So work on the lighting.
And the other thing is, if you have something like webcam settings, if you're on a Mac, you can get webcam settings. I don't know of very many good ones on the PC. I think there is one for the Brio. There's a Logitech software that isn't great. But on the Mac, you can use webcam settings or manual camera to adjust the colors, increase the contrast, all those little bits and pieces on it to make it look a little bit better too. Mickey?
Oh, sorry, left my hand up.
Okay, very good. All right. I'm giving myself like a 5-minute window when we're running over to answer the last questions, and then we move on. So now we're moving into the second hour, and we're talking about audio processing and audio chains. And I know that Marty may pop up here. I think he had something he might have worked on to show us there. But we'll we'll start without him because I don't see him here right now. We've got a bunch of questions already stacked up, so we won't do too much preamble. But do any of our audio folks want to talk a little bit about overview before we jump into questions of just ways to think about the audio pipeline or the audio chain? I mean, we have very obvious ones that are compressors and expanders, and then we can talk through some of those. But then we have obviously we can get much more elegant about that. Marty, did you have something you wanted to show us?
I have to set it up. I have to do another screen share. So I'll try and get that working for you.
Sure. Absolutely. Go ahead, Greg. And you don't have to, Marty, by the way. I just thought you were already set up for something. I didn't want to leave you behind. I didn't want to have you do some work and then not come to you. The last one was great. Greg.
Okay, well, I would just like to say one thing about EQ in general is there's kind of two types. There's subtractive and additive. And the subtractive EQ is when you're trying to eliminate problems. Additive EQ is you're trying to sweeten little areas. And typically you would do the subtractive EQ first, and then any other processing, and then make up with your additive at the end. Or that's how I typically would do it.
That's great. Any other general comments before we start jumping into questions here about processing? Go ahead, Courtney.
I think a good rule of thumb for production sound mixers is the less you do, the better, and leave it for the post-production to do all of the modification and adjustment, and record as broad a spectrum. Sorry about that. To draw as broad a spectrum, record as broad a spectrum signal as you can, knowing that in post you have a lot more flexibility, because if you remove something in production, gaining it back is much more difficult because you're just going to add noise.
Yep.
And speaking of noise, I just want to say that Sound Devices, I think, announced yesterday that Cedar is now a plug-in for their 800 series recorders.
Yes. Yeah. What was the price on it? I think it's a bit much. I mean,
I don't think they announced the price. I didn't see the prices, but I'm sure it's a lot
pricey. Yeah, but Cedar is really good. It's really good. No, go ahead, Bill.
I have always thought that one of the things that makes audio confusing for people who are starting into it is that you don't have a fixed thing you begin with. When you do a recording, that recording has a nature. And so it always reminds me of cooking. It's like if you get a piece of protein and you're going to start cooking with it, if you don't understand whether that thing is initially salty or sweet or whatever, then the recipe you add to it to make it pleasing to the taste is going to be different. I think sound for me kind of works the same way. If I have a perfect full broadband recording in a perfect circumstance out there, then it's not going to need much tweaking at all if that's what I'm going for. But if it comes in limited by bad microphone technique or messed up with no low frequencies or splashy high frequencies, I will have to treat it differently, just like you would add different recipe ingredients to something to make it taste good.
Like adding a lot of salt to a bad steak. All right.
Oh yeah.
Let's jump into the questions.
First one comes from Curtis Judge in Park City, and he says, when you use an EQ for live audio, do you always apply a high pass filter or a low pass, or cut boost for correction or sweetening?
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Marty.
Yeah, for me, EQ always, all the time, every single track. High pass filter, wherein you're cutting the low end.
Can you tell everyone what a high pass filter is?
So yeah, high pass, which also is exactly the same thing as a low cut. It's essentially, if you look at your spectrum, you are putting a cut at the lower frequency. So you're allowing.
So basically saying nothing goes. A high pass filter says the high stuff will pass through.
Yes.
And these low to whatever we set it to isn't going to go through at all.
Yeah. So it's very handy, say for speech, like, you for a lot of speech, you barely have any information, say below 80 hertz. And a lot of times even like below 120 hertz, depending on the situation and who's speaking. So you want to just get rid of that noise that you don't need.
And that can often be plosives, that can be rumble, that can be a lot of other things that are there, right?
And yeah, and of course, like these numbers, the frequencies I'm throwing out, these vary, of course, from a case to case basis. So you really have to use your ears each time you do that.
That's great. Marty?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Depending on what your source material is, and depending when you say live, is it live to broadcast or is it live to open speakers? And how many microphones do you have open at one time? The more microphones you have open, the more that the noise from individual microphones adds together and builds up. So when you take out all that extraneous noise from each microphone, you're making your mix much cleaner as well.
We got into a habit of adding a seeder. We had a seeder DNS8, so for all the channels, each channel had its own, processing with the seeder, and since we just talked about it, and then we used the Dugan Auto Mix, to add to that. And the two of those together are, for a roundtable, are lethal, just because we had to add stuff back in because it was just so crystal clear all the time. You clean it up and then you'd auto mix everything down and you just touch it. The thing with cedar, you have to be very gentle, but we just gently pull all that stuff out. And then you had to put the audience mics back in because it would be really sterile if you didn't. Go ahead, Greg, and then Mickey.
Yeah, and one of the dangers in mixing a live band, for instance, is that almost all the instruments have the capability of producing very low and very high frequencies. And each individual player, when you're sound checking, they all want to hear the full range of their instrument. Okay, which seems kind of natural, but when you put all that together, that's when you get a lot of mud, because especially in the low frequency, those low frequencies mask things and they build up. So for instance, you would end up like a typical acoustic guitar, for instance, you would definitely roll off that low end a lot, so much so that if he heard it by itself, he wouldn't like it. But the fact is that an acoustic guitar is basically an extension of the hi-hat. It's a rhythm instrument. So you have to play each instrument in the frequency groups that, where they make the most sense, right, and try to prevent a lot of, buildup so you can hear the bass, so you can hear a little bit of thump out of the kick.
I think that's where people think that, someone mixing and just mixing the volume at a concert, but it's all the processing and figuring out how to make that work. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Chris.
Yeah, definitely. Like when you're mixing, you are finding pockets, like frequency wise, for each source to naturally sit in. You don't need everything to be full range. You want like to assign like, okay, this, like say the acoustic guitar, you can take over 4K and above. And this other source, you can take over like the low end. And just going back to what you were talking about earlier, Alex, about signal to noise ratio, like, you can think of it like, say, each source has both signal and noise. And say, for example, you're in a panel with 4 microphones live and only one person is speaking at the time. That one source has a signal and that same source has noise, but all the other microphones are only contributing noise. So
Right.
you have one source of signal and then 4 sources of noise. So you want to, with tools like Cedar and cleaning up with EQ and maybe some gating. If you're very, very light gating, you can sort of balance it out and keep mostly the signal.
And that's why a lot of us are so addicted to Dugan in our the auto mix, because it's pushing those down when it's picking the source and softly pushing the other ones down to reduce the noise and reduce the transients that you get with multiple mics. Go ahead, Chris and Courtney.
I was going to say, having mixed not a lot almost none professionally, but a lot, for fun, live music. There's nothing better than a band who understands how to work with each other. A good band that plays well together, they'll find their places, and it makes the job of the front of house mix much easier, because you're not doing a bunch of stuff electronically. They're doing it on their own.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the bands some of the high end, the really technical bands really understand where they fit into that puzzle. Like there's creative bands that just play great music, and then there's ones that are both creative but they can also be very technical. So they really understand where they want their instruments. And a lot of times it's the bands I find that mix their own stuff. Like they're in Logic doing their own thing, doing their own parts. So they really understand when they get up on stage, they understand where, what they're trying to achieve, out of it. And I think you end up with a better mix. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Greg.
Right. And in a live situation, you have to deal with acoustical resonance of the room. And this is why they always, a good sound mixer will come in and tune the room, tune the characteristics of the EQ to match the resonant frequency of the room, because some frequencies will carry and some frequencies will be absorbed, and some frequencies will just repeat over and over again and get things very muddy. And so you have to tune your PA for the room. And even if you're recording with no PA, you still have to deal with, if it's a very live room, you have to deal with the resonant frequency of the room, which is going to contribute to your overall sound, unless you're in a completely dead sound space.
Greg?
And the other thing is that the whole band and mixing thing has changed over time. In the old days, it was only the vocals that went through the PA. The band took care of itself, and each person was responsible for filling that frequency hole. Hence the giant amps and the SVTs all over the place, and but you had to do that, and you also had to push your sound from the stage out to the audience. Now, currently, we don't do it that way, anymore. In fact, the less sound coming from the stage, the better. You want to let the mixer give the audience the fullest experience that he can, and keep the stage volume to the minimum that it can be. Hence a lot of the in-ear monitors, and also, like, as a bass player, you have to learn to lower your bass, lower the frequency, so you're just hearing the attack, so you know where you are, kind of a thing. Right. But you're not contributing to the boom of the room. And so monitoring also becomes very critical too. And just for me, and I'm probably not in the majority here, but I don't want to hear a specified mix tailored for me. I want to hear the mix. I want to hear just the mix, because I know where I sit in that mix, and I can make decisions based on the mix that I hear.
Yep. Chris, and then Bill.
Respectfully, Greg, that's an interesting comment about you don't want to hear a specific wedge for you. You don't need your own mix. Do you was it Altamont, the festival at Altamont? Was that the first place where stage monitors were used at a big event? Do you know offhand? Okay.
No idea.
Yeah, the idea of stage monitor. The other thing that I find very interesting is a lot of medium-sized bands are now traveling with a rack where they're running their own in-ears. And I find that those bands tend to play very well together because they've practiced so much listening to everybody. And what they'll do is they'll take that rack and just patch it. They have a splitters built into it, and they just patch that straight into front of house, and front of house doesn't have to worry about wedges at all or monitors.
Yeah, I mean, most of the bands we're working with now almost all have in-ear for everybody. Like everybody just has an ear, and they're listening to that mix. They're very rarely.
But the fact that they're traveling with their mix that they've been rehearsing with, and then they just plug into a radio station or a concert hall or a stadium, it doesn't matter. They're good to go.
Yeah, Bill.
And also, for the people who are getting into this for the first time, there is a major difference between a front of house mix, that's normally the mixing console you see in the middle of the crowd, and a monitor mix for people behind who are the band and they are playing. So there's two different jobs going on there at the same time. Mm-hmm. And relative to what Chris was just talking about, oh no, I lost that train of thought. Let's go on.
Next question.
Okay, we're talking to Curtis Judge in Park City, who said, discuss your strategy for setting compressor parameters for live streaming threshold, attack, release, ratio, and makeup.
Anyone want to jump into how they approach that? Go ahead, Greg.
I'm going to let most of these guys handle that. I typically don't wear makeup at all. So
makeup gain as opposed to makeup. I should have said that.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Okay, so the idea of a compressor is basically a tool that limits dynamic range. And dynamic range is just simply the difference between the softest sounds and the loudest sounds. So when you take a thing that has very quiet things and very loud things, and you make the quieter louder and the louder quieter so that everything fits into a dynamic range, that is called compression. Now, this is right on the edge of other things like limiting, which is taking that top down, expanding, which is bringing the bottom up. The compressor's often doing both, and there's all sorts of different kinds of compressors, and they have these parameters like threshold. How loud does it have to be before I quash the top? Or how fast do I change that value? These things are all complex.
And the main thing you're trying to do is you're trying not to, Mickey, do we need to add another monitor? Is that what you want to do? Is that why your other hand is up? Yeah. So the main thing is, I can't do it. I'm not a host or co-host. So someone bring Mickey in. So the main thing you're trying to do is you're trying to not dig down and get a hold of your noise floor. When you set up that compressor, what you're trying to do is, so I typically set my threshold, and everyone can say what they set theirs to, but for spoken word, my compressor is usually set between -18 and -20. The way that I'm kind of, as I pipe it in, it depends on what your core volume is as it goes in as well. So, but peaking at -6, I'll be at -18, -20, and I usually start at about a 2 to 3 to 1. And what that means is that over -20, I'm going to every dB it went, it basically gets pushed down. So for every 3 dBs that it went up, it gets pushed down to 1. So things basically, a compressor is really just pushing down on the top, and it's just saying you're not gonna. It's a really hard compressor is a limiter. One that is very close to the edge, where it's like 10 to 1 compression is really a limiter at that point. And so it says for every 10 dB, I'm only going to go up 1 dB. And so what you're doing is you're pushing down that top part, and then you make that up by bringing the volume back up again. So it grabs onto that, it pushes down the louder volumes, and then it stretches it all back up. And that's why they're all closer together. When you get right on the edge of what you're saying, that's when we start talking about pumping. Because what's happening is your voice or whatever you want is going above and below that threshold, that's there, and it's jumping in and out. When you go down too low, you don't go down far enough, you don't get anything. If you go down too low, you get noise. So those are the things that are there when you're trying to think about where that threshold is. And then you have from attack, and I have to admit, for me, attack and release is related to. I listen to it and decide whether it's doing what it needs to do. Mickey, were you going to show something, or are you? Otherwise, we're going to.
Yeah, I have a Pro Tools setup here, and if I can just screen share real quick.
Can you set up Mickey to as a co-host, or the second Mickey? And there you go. Okay, there you go.
Are you guys seeing that?
Yep.
So if I have this machine unmuted, which I am going to check right now, and I believe it is so. I have a recording from earlier in the show. I believe this is Chris Fenwick speaking.
I noticed, Guy, that I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day. I had to reconnect them and kind of.
So
now I want to know what I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have original sound turned on, so let me switch that real quick. But yeah, if you want to move on to another question, I'll get this set up properly.
Okay, great. Next question.
Okay, we're going to move to Curtis Judd, Park City. How do you set the threshold, attack, range on an audio gate expander to help reduce or avoid flapping?
It's the same thing that I was talking about before, just the inverse of that. And so expander does what the compressor does, it just does it at the bottom. So it just says I'm going to push stuff away. So here's my threshold, and when I get to that threshold, I'm going to amplify that, that drop out to push those things away. Where that threshold is will depend on your recording. I don't. Go ahead, Mickey. Mickey, were you going to say something? You look like you were.
No, I was just getting. I think I'm pretty much set up now. If I could screen share again.
Yeah, let's go ahead and have you do that.
So yeah, this is. I'll play that clip again, and this was Chris Fenwick talking earlier. And if you could see the waveform, it's quite dynamic. So we have a louder part here, and then Chris talks a little quieter here. And with something like a compressor, like I have a basic compressor here. This is resonance compressor from Waves. You could sort of bring those peaks and those valleys a little closer together, so you have a more consistent sound. So, like I'm gonna put this in loop mode, and if I
will
play this back.
notice. I noticed, Guy, that I had some
For
trouble
something
with
like
my
dialogue,
room
I
and
would
my
typically
iPad
maybe
getting like
go somewhere
disconnected the other
in
day. Had to
2 or
reconnect
3
them and kind of.
milliseconds of attack.
I will notice.
And
I noticed.
150 of release somewhere there, and very light compression, maybe like 2:1 ratio somewhere there. And I
I
would,
will notice.
in terms of, and of course, again, I will always say this, like it depends what the source is like. You know, everything, how it sounds like will change how much processing you do. So
I will notice.
I'll ease this
Guy,
down,
that I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day.
and I'll bring
Had
up
to
the
reconnect
monitor a
them
bit.
and kind of. I will notice. I noticed, Guy, that I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day.
You
Had
know,
to
that's
reconnect
that's
them and kind of.
I think
I will notice. I
a bit
noticed,
more
Guy,
even.
that I had some
And
trouble with my
and
room.
this is what was mentioned earlier in the questions. This is makeup gain. So in this meter, you'll see how much reduction the compressor is doing. So
I will notice. I
at
noticed,
the loudest
Guy, that
portions,
I had some trouble
we're
with my
probably
room and my
looks like we're
iPad
getting like
getting like
6 or
disconnected
7
the other
dB
day.
of
Had to reconnect them and
reduction
kind of.
there. So
I will
you
notice. I
want to make up
noticed,
some of that
Guy,
reduction you're
that
doing.
I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day. Had to
So yeah, maybe
reconnect them
somewhere
and kind
there
of.
for around 4
I will
dB.
notice.
And if say you print out what you're doing, so I have this track here, which is where the recording is, routed to this track, which I will be recording what I've done. And this is typically done on the actual print master, the final mix that you're doing, wherein you route your final mix aux bus to another track and you record it there, which is typically called printing. Uh, if you do that,
I will notice. I noticed, Guy, that I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day. Had to reconnect them and kind of.
so you can see here on this what is essentially the output of that track is that the peaks are a little more controlled here compared to how much variance we have on this track compared to this. So you're bringing those louder sounds closer to the quieter sounds, and you can bring it up with gain and compression. You can use it both as a creative tool in terms of, say, you can make a source sound thicker. So if you look at this, say if you zoom into the waveforms, this is a more robust waveform, a stronger, thicker waveform than this one, which if you mix it in with other sources, it would stand out a bit more. So if you're playing music, for example, in the background, um, this will help the dialogue, the speech, stick out a bit more. Or say, for example, if you want a massive, heavy kick drum, you want that like quite compressed, so it's a nice thick sound, and that would stick out on top of your other sources like guitars and stuff like that. And aside from the creative, using it as a creative tool, you can also use it as a technical tool. If you need to make things a bit louder, you can, for example, like I just undid that. You can go like you can really exaggerate the ratio 20:1, and
I will
say
notice. I noticed,
bring the
Guy,
threshold
that
real down, and then
I
you
will
can print
notice.
that.
I noticed, Guy, that
Actually, let me make the attack even like quicker and
Yeah, really squash it.
really squash the waveform. So that's a little too much, but let's see what it looks like.
I noticed.
No, not that much. Not that much.
Well, that's the final mix of Metallica right there.
Yeah.
That last album. Oh, that was brick walled.
That I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day. Had to reconnect them. That sounds and like your kind of. typical podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So that's because we brought the peaks down way a lot. You could now bring the entire mix up, and that is like a technical use of compression, wherein if you really need to make something sound louder, a whole mix sound louder, you can squash that waveform, then stretch it back out, and the entire mix sounds loud.
And play that one again, please.
Play back the squashed mix.
Yes.
Oh man, let me, for safety, just bring this.
I'm taking my ears out.
Let me bring the fader down a bit. Bring up the fader here, and then I'll ease it in. Mute that and unmute and solo.
Guy that I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day. I had to reconnect them and kind of. I noticed.
So yeah, that's like your typical FM radio or podcast sound.
Or my early podcasts.
Compare that to like the dynamic raw one.
I noticed, Guy, that I had some trouble with my room and my iPad getting like disconnected the other day. I had to reconnect them and kind of. I will notice.
And one of the tricks is beyond the creative is the listener is as you make that more present, as you bring those voices up, it tires the brain, it tires you to listen to it. And so, the things that one of the reasons that NPR, does so little, on theirs is because people listen to it all day. And Mickey's very good at like pulling ours together without hitting us over the head with it in the stream. But the reason is if you listen to something a long time that's really compressed or very limited in its range, it tends to, get tiring. And so that's the thing you want to kind of think about from that thing. As a commercial, you don't care. You got them for 30 seconds. But if you're listening to it all day, it becomes more of a thing. Stuart, then Courtney, and then Chris, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just a quick question. Where can people apply for Mickey's masterclass in audio mixing? That was brilliant, mate.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We'll see if we can drag Mickey into something. Courtney.
Maybe Mickey can explain. I think I know the difference, but I'm not sure. The difference between in post-production normalization and using, the limiter and the compression.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. Please correct me if I don't understand it correctly, because I don't really use normalization much. But from my understanding is that normalization doesn't really affect dynamics. You can change, say, you can normalize to a certain peak level, or you can normalize to a certain RMS level. RMS is essentially, it means root mean square, which is kind of a fancy way of getting an average. You can normalize to that, but you're not actually changing how louder sounds compared to quieter sounds. And Greg will correct me now.
Go ahead, Greg.
No correction, just an addition. There's peak normalization, which brings all of your peaks up to the highest point that it can go, so that you know that none of your peaks are crunching, and then you can work with it from there. But there's also the normalization where you compress a bit, and if you peak normalize again, that'll bring the level up. You can compress some more, peak normalize again, and that'll bring the level up. Okay, and as you do that, this is the whole loudness wars thing, right? And so I want my record, louder than Vinny's.
Right.
So yeah.
Chris, and then Roscoe.
Mickey, I was gonna say I've never ever seen, and total inexperience with Pro Tools, I've never seen that technique of taking that track and printing it down to another track. Is that completely normal? Because I was kind of shocked that as you were adjusting the compressor, that I just wasn't seeing the waveform change in the source track. Is that not something that Pro Tools does, or can it do it, or curious?
Mickey, and then we're going to go to Roscoe and then move out because we're going to
go. Yeah, with Pro Tools, well, at least since I think a year ago or a year and a half ago, they added what they call clip effects, wherein you can add, say, compression or whatever insert you want directly on the clip. And when you do that, that's when you see the waveform actually change. But the way Pro Tools works is it, you can think of it like how an analog mixer works, wherein the waveform is just your source input. Whatever effect you do doesn't change on the waveform. It goes through a signal chain.
Roscoe, real quick.
Normalization works on the entire section that you've selected. Compressor is kind of active to the waveform, whereas normalization, if there's loud sounds in there, it will not correct for the lower sounds. It'll just bring up the loud sounds and normalize to that level, and the lower sounds will stay wherever they are relative to the loud sounds.
I think it just scales up the whole thing. That is, I mean, most normalization is calculated by just scales the whole thing up to the peaks, just go to whatever you tell it to do. Normalize to 3, it just scales the whole thing up to make that work. Next question.
Moving on, Michael Fraley of Dallas Fort Worth says, does anybody have any experience with the Harrison Mix Bus?
No. Mickey.
One if Jeff was here earlier, and I believe he has a lot of experience. So if he's still listening and he can jump back on, he can probably comment on it.
Yeah. So maybe Jeff will jump back in. Next question.
Mark Hadley in Seattle says, assuming it's okay to use a computer to process audio, OBS includes compressor, expander, gain invert, polarity, noise gate, noise suppression. Are these as good as any software audio plugins?
Go ahead, Marty.
In a pinch, maybe, but they don't have as much adjustability as a plugin would have. But sometimes they will get you by when you need it.
Yep. Stuart.
Yeah, Marty's absolutely correct on the basic ones are there to get you started. But one thing to remember when you're doing audio on any PC, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Mac or a PC, is you need really clean power, especially if you're bringing analog audio in. But also double check the type of RAM you've got and make sure it's the, I believe, Jason will probably correct me for the name, but it's the one that does the error correction in there. Because if you end up with mistakes going in and out of RAM, it will affect your audio and your picture.
I mean, basically how you get to that final waveform is the quality of that compressor. So they do the same things, but how they process it. So while they might do a 3-to-1 compression, but when it does that, how does it process that information? And what are the fine tuning? That's what makes the difference between different kinds of compressors, is the processing quality of it. So you can have something that has the same feature set. It's kind of like you can have a lot of preamps, but the quality of the preamp comes down to the circuitry and so on and so forth. And many filters, they'll do the same thing on the outside, but what they're actually doing and how they move the audio bits around is what is the magic sauce. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, a lot of times, actually, interestingly, would say something with, for example, compressors, a lot of the inconsistencies and variabilities in them, that's a selling point. Because, like, say, in terms of, say, when people say this compressor is warm, that means it's not doing something linear. It's not processing it just like directly. Okay, bring the gain down this much. And depending on your ratio, it's adding something to it, and it's adding some sort of noise, some sort of inconsistency to its processing, and that's what makes it interesting.
Yep. Bill.
And to that exactly, I'm often getting asked now, as somebody who does a good bit of voice work, for the compressed file that I normally send to a client so that they wouldn't say this is thin and I don't like it, and the original, which allows somebody like Mickey to take the original signal and salt it to taste. There's nothing worse than somebody slapping a big compressor because they sound cool on a voiceover, sending that in, and then you're stuck with this thing that has this profile and you can't get rid of it. So I'm often sending 2 files, not one. Here's my thought of how it should sound. Here's the original, so that somebody who's technically competent, somebody who's not can just stick the one on that sounds good. Somebody who is technically competent can reset it to their tastes.
Good, Marty.
So something important that's worth remembering is that an audio travels through a signal chain. And every link in the chain is important. And the very first couple of links are the most important. If you aren't capturing good audio to begin with, it's really, really difficult and perhaps impossible to make up for what's missing in the audio that you've captured. That goes towards the kind of microphone you're using, the placement of the microphone, and the acoustics around the microphone. If you're miking a kick drum and you use a microphone that has the low end rolled off because that microphone was designed and intended to be used on vocals, you're not going to be able to make up that low end that you haven't captured with the microphone.
Absolutely. Next question.
James Babbitt comes in next from San Diego with, when are you using dynamic EQ instead of regular EQ in isotrope ozone 9 specifically?
Go ahead, Marty.
So dynamic EQs are a really interesting thing. They're a combination of compressor and EQ. And what it does with a normal compressor, the compressor is working on the entire frequency band of the audio. Everything is all compressed together. With a dynamic EQ, you're breaking the frequency spectrum up into smaller chunks, and then you're able to apply a process, whether it be compressor or even expander, on each of the individual frequency bands. And so if you have a signal that, like a de-esser is one form of dynamic EQ because it's only acting on the high frequencies where the S's are. So if you have a guitar, for instance, and there's a lead riff, but one note happens to be much louder than the rest of the notes for a variety of reasons. If you compress the entire thing, everything will get compressed together. But if you use a dynamic EQ, you can apply a compressor to just that one note. Really interesting thing.
Mickey? Did you have a question? I thought you had a question there.
I'm sorry, no.
I use dynamic compressors a lot for podcasts, where I pull out the voice. I don't want to necessarily do it to everything, but I just want to pull that part, that frequency out just a little bit, just to kind of step it out in front of a lot of other things. Go ahead, Greg.
Kind of a cousin to that is the multiband compressor, and it works kind of in the opposite way, where its main function is compressing, but within separate frequency ranges. The same as a dynamic EQ, but the priority is on the compression, not on the EQ.
Right.
Okay, so the dynamic EQ is the other way around, and they sound totally different, but presumably doing the same things, just different priority.
Courtney?
And in live venue PA, it's used for elimination of feedback elimination. It's used constantly.
Right. Absolutely. Next question.
Jason Fitzgerald in New York City says, can anyone recommend a good auto mixer plugin for post-production other than Dugan? Uses to mix down long panel discussions or interviews from ISO recordings.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, I put it in there. It's Levelator. It's for a really long thing. It'll save you a lot of time, and it will go through and take someone who is a little bit low and bring them up, and someone who's a little loud. It does a decent job. It's not as good as going
That's
through
evening them all out, but what is auto mixing between them? So grabbing like 4 tracks, I think what he's trying to do is grab 4 tracks and mix to only the person who's talking, which I think Levelator kind of just evens each track out.
Levelator's when it's all been put onto one track, correct?
Right. Yeah. So the question is how do you what is an auto mix? How does an auto mix work in post? Go ahead, Marty.
In post, it would work pretty much the same way as it would live, assuming that you have.
Is there a filter?
He says he's got ISO recordings.
He's got ISOs, but other than automating it, with hardware, or by hand. Is there a tool that will do the auto mix? I don't know of a tool that actually does the auto mix between tracks. Seems like a real product opportunity there for Dugan, but
Oh,
or
and
for other people.
software in a DAW.
Like a software in a DAW
That is a good
to
question.
do an auto mix, because for me it's typically it's just been I sit there with with sliders, go up down down up, and then I go back and I tweak it and then I'm done. And for a long one, it doesn't take. When you get used to it, I can do it in double speed. So I can't do it faster than double speed, but I can do it 2x because you can see it coming and you just kind of move it up and down. But I don't know of any plugin that does that, Chris.
I'm with you. I do a lot of stuff manually. That's why I like getting multi-track stuff in a single file. It actually is quite advantageous in Final Cut because I can open it up and see everybody talking, and I just rubber band it down, just get it over with.
Yeah, just I'm surprised that there's not a plugin that does that though. That looks at like 6 tracks and then just does what Dugan does, but does it to the tracks. Go ahead, Stuart, then Greg, and then Marty, and then Mickey. And then
Yeah,
Bill.
just a couple of our attendees in the chat have pointed out Orphonic, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and Vocal Rider are plugins that appear to do that.
Excellent. Great. The chat comes in to save the day. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm going to give you a super old school view. I like all my tracks broken out, and I will cut and fill. So I'll cut. It's time consuming, but I've gotten pretty good at it. So you just run through each track and you cut the dialogue similar to what you would do in film production. And then you fill all those tracks, and then just manually manipulate the levels so that they're approximately the same. And it's fantastic.
I think probably one of the reasons I stopped doing podcasts is that breaths drive me crazy. So I would literally go through every track and remove all the breaths, and then
get rid of them.
I just pull all the breaths out, and then I would go through the mix, and I have some folks now that I hire to do that, but it is to your point, time consuming, but man, does it make it a nice sound. And it's funny that go back to NPR. NPR doesn't do that, and I hear every breath. Anyway, Marty, and then Mickey, then Bill.
So there's a process. You can use expanders and noise gates on each of the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
If the tracks are pretty clean and you're not hearing other people talk bleed through on mics, you can use an expander and noise gate on each track. That'll bring down the level between phrases.
Right.
You can also use something called side chaining, where the noise gate or compressor can be activated based on the audio from a different track.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So you can do auto ducking, with that, or to kind of press that down to attenuate the volume of one track based on the volume of another, which is kind of what Dugan's doing. Bill.
And I think for those of you who are listening, you're starting to get an idea of why sometimes we're pretty strict about. I'd love to have the same mics going through the same mixers and things like that as our sources, because you're trying to figure out these things once. If you're mixing something in a multi-track and you've just thrown it together and somebody has a dynamic mic, somebody else has a condenser, somebody else is using a lavalier, somebody else is mic'd with an overhead shotgun, the sound profile of all of those are going to be different enough where your mix is going to be a really challenging, as opposed to I've got a panel and there are 6 SM58s sitting there. They're all going to be delivering consistency, so my work is much easier later.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to Mike Henderson of Colorado, who is saying, in what cases would you use the built-in compressor or limiter in a Zoom mobile recorder, if at all, or is it better to apply these in post? And his recordings are mostly speech.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I'll answer this as if it was a test cam instead of a Zoom, because it's got the same sort of functions. When you've doubled the input onto a second track, so you'd have a clean input on, say, track 1, and the same input is on track 2, and you're putting the limiter or the compressor on that track. So you've got a clean recording and a limited recording. The same goes with being able to change the levels and make use of the 32-bit float on Sound Devices gear, which probably Mickey will speak to next.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I was gonna give another. I would on prosumer gear and any kind of consumer gear, my tendency would be to not use any of the onboard processing at all. And instead I would go in favor of recording a second track like 10 dB down from the original.
I mean, I think one of the things that limiters are useful for is just making sure you don't over modulate, into the, into it if you're recording. If the limiter is good, you have to test the limiter to find out. If the limiter is a digital limiter, it oftentimes isn't going to be that much more effective. If it's a true analog, like a lot of the sound devices, like the 788s and so on and so forth, I believe have dual limiters, and they're dual analog limiters that will, one slows it down and the other one stops it. And so you'll flatten out your audio, but you won't ever go through it. And the thing to know is if you lean on your limiter too much, you're flattening out all that audio. So it starts to sound muddy because you're in wide. I don't know if that makes sense to people, but because you're hitting that limiter really hard. It does change. We record most of our stuff now with 32-bit float on some version of a sound devices tool. It's funny. The first time I turned it on, I was like, "What happened to the limiter? Like, what do I do with the limiter?" I was like, "Oh, right, I don't need one. I don't need a limiter on a 32-bit float." Mickey.
Yeah, I would say like in situations where you have an extremely fast turnover, like news maybe, where you have to kick something out real quick, and you are very well versed in processing and you know what you're doing, then I would maybe use it. But if you're not sure what you're doing, just leave it to people further down the line to take care
And also,
of it.
if you're doing a live input, if you're using it as a live interface, you may need to use those things to pull it together because your final output is what's going through the system. Last question.
Last question from James Babbitt here in San Diego. Does anybody have a review of the AirPods Max headphones? How is the sound with an Atmos movie?
So, Guy, have you watched any Atmos movies with the Max?
Not full movies. I've just been kind of bouncing around, listening to a bunch to see what's going on, some of the Disney stuff. It's still Bluetooth at the end of the day, so it's not a cabled connection. So to put this in perspective, I have some other headphones that I've used in the past, these high-end Bauer and Wilkins. And when you have a cabled connection and then you add in something like a Dragonfly, which is a USB DAC. So I mean, just this DAC, a digital analog converter, is $199. This just basically takes USB and converts it to 3.5 millimeter analog. So I mean, when you're at that level, when you start going for all the details and nuances, these phones they're not that, so to kid yourself and think that they're going to have all the detail of something super high end, it's not that, but they are phenomenal. I've been wearing them a lot just for exercising, listening to music recreationally. But as far as movies, I would say that there's other things out there, but these, because they've worked so tightly with Apple, that when you turn your head, it is pretty phenomenal to actually get that Atmos effect like you do with the AirPods Pros.
I thought there was something wrong with a mix recently because I had my AirPods in and I was previewing something and I turned my head and I was like, "Oh, it's off all on one side," and and I was trying to figure out what happened and I looked over and I was like, "No, it's right," and I was like, "No, it's off to one side," and it took me like 15 seconds to figure out that I was trying to figure out what happened to my audio mix, and it took me like 2 times to go, "Oh, it's the AirPods." Anyway, great.
Can I just give one quick story that really, really exemplifies the?
Yeah.
Okay. I got a call when I was living in Hawaii. I got a call to do ADR with Chris Christopherson on Blade, and he didn't want to go to LA, so they wanted to do it there, and I found a little studio. And we went in and they sent me a guide track and they sent me the picture, blah, blah, blah. And we started knocking it out. And the guide, the ADR I was doing didn't match at all. So I'm EQing and I'm trying to match it and I sent them like 4 versions of the track. But the original was so far out, and I followed up later and I said, how did it work out? And there's, "Oh God, it was great. It was perfect. It matched perfectly." And I said, "Well, which version?" And the mixer said, "The original." It just slid right in. And to me, it was so far out that it was unusable. So
Alex, you're muted.
You're muted now.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, one of the things I've learned after all these years of delivering to things is you really do have to pay a little bit of attention to who are you delivering to and what's the target for all of this. When I started, I was doing mostly broadcast, and in my early days in radio, we talk about compressors and limiters on a broadcast radio transmitter. Those are gigantically important, and they're at the transmitter because they're trying to make sure their power radiation are within FCC limits, or they'll get their license pulled. So even if we didn't put any compressing or any limiting on a tape that we sent out to a radio station, it would have those in it before it got too far. Television's the same way. There are definite standards that they're going to be putting out, and what you're delivering to them will be forced to meet those standards. You have to pay attention to that. Here in the world where we're all on internet, the internet standards aren't quite as standardized. They're getting a lot better than they were maybe 10 years ago. But, I've had 4 or 5 different broadcast spec sheets come in with, at this point we're at -20 LUFS, and then we're going to -16, and then we're at 24, and it's just moved around over the course of years. So I would just say, no matter where you're delivering, pay some attention to the technical details in those little terms and conditions, or whether it's on delivering to YouTube or wherever, and try to get a sense of what they're looking for so you can come close to delivering what they want. Then they won't hack as much on what you're sending them and change it.
Go ahead, Courtney, and then Mickey, and then we're going to close it up.
Yeah, maybe you should set up a National Association of Podcasters with a Standards Bureau. But the question I had was about the AirPods. If you make a mistake and put the left ear on the right ear and the right ear on the left ear, put them on backwards, when you turn your head, does it screw up your brain completely?
You throw up.
I haven't tried that. They don't fit very well the wrong way, so I haven't tried that. Now I have to try it. I'll know by tomorrow.
And then watch a roller coaster video.
Mickey?
Yeah, just to add on to what Bill was saying regarding specs. Every broadcaster has their own specs. There are standards that are set by the industry in each country, or even, I guess, even each state. But at the end of the day, it's the broadcaster that sets the specs of what they're expecting. And with regards to the broadcaster putting in processing, compression, limiting, whatever it may be, if you don't meet those specs, you're essentially giving the broadcaster the opportunity to set the mix how they want it to be using their automated tools, as opposed to you deciding as the mixer how you want it to sound.
Yep, absolutely. So great. It was a good conversation. We learned. I think we really just did compressing. Like it was an hour on compression, which is good. It's good. It's probably the most used filter that we use. We probably come back to that another day and talk about other ones. But I thought the whole chain would take us time. I was like, there's no way. I did think about just talking about compressors, but I was like, there's no way that we could do a whole hour on compression. And I was wrong. Can anyone else, Guy or anybody else, able to run the post show or just give people a link to, set up a post show room? I realize I have a conflict, and I need to know where do you request getting to be able to open 2 rooms at the same time? Is that just through support?
Yeah, I'll send you the link. So you can't. I'll double check. I have it enabled to where you can be in 2 meetings, but you can't host 2 meetings.
No.
So you can, so it would still.
I don't mind doing it, Alex. But the problem is I have to leave this meeting. I don't know how to set that up.
Well, just create one.
I know, but I have to leave here to go create it.
You don't. You can just go on the web and create it.
Oh.
On the web interface.
That sounds hard.
Well, you can. What's funny is that I've never actually created a meeting in the app.
Hold on, let me see. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can do that.
Like how do you go to the web? I'm like, how do you do it in the app? Like, I don't even know how to create a meeting in the app.
I've never created a meeting on the.
I've never created one in the app. I go to the web page. I go to zoom.us. I log in. I go to my meetings. I say schedule one. That's just how I do all of the meetings.
Hold on. Stuff's happening. Meetings. It's not here. Oh wait, I got to do this.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Leave the meeting here.
Feel free.
Create the meeting. Post it in Mukana. We'll all join you.
Yeah, you just post it in Mukana.
Good idea. Bye.
All right, so I'm going to let you guys go. The next, we'll figure it out pre-show next time. But I realized I hadn't said it before. But for the next 3 days, I'm going to have a conflict with the post show, and I'll try to get Guy. If you can send me those instructions, I'll just Discord me or whatever with the instructions. I'll try to get it set up in the next day or two, and then there won't be a conflict. But it sounds like it doesn't not going to help me because I'm the host on all the shows. So
you need another enterprise account to use.
Well, is it 1080p? It's important that it's a 1080p account. That's the problem. Is that what we're doing is we're actually looking at a. The reason I'm using my account is because we're looking at a multi-view from Los Angeles. Like there's a bunch of us all looking at the multi-view, and so the resolution becomes important.
You can use my 1080p account.
Sorry,
you can use my 1080p account. Yeah, okay, in there.
Okay, great. We'll talk about that. I'm going to do it this way today, and then we'll figure it out between today and tomorrow. We'll get this sorted out. All right.
So bottom line is everybody looks at Makana for the link to the next chat.
Look at Makana. All right. See you.